At the Movies. Come on, who's excited for At the Movies? Yes, one of my favorite series that we do from time to time at the movies, and we are going to have some fun. Come on, how many already had some fun today, right? We're having some fun. We got some popcorn. Some of you, I hear you rustling around with your popcorn a little bit today. We got some movie characters out there. Make sure and go by and take a picture with Ray or with some of the other characters that are out there, or sit in the seats and get your picture out there at the photo booth so that you can share it with your friends. We are having a good time in this series, but it's more than just fun. Everybody nudge your neighbor and tell them it's more than just fun. Come on. It's fun with a purpose. So tell your other neighbors, fun with a purpose. Fun with a purpose. That we're going to have a good time in this next 4 weeks together in our At the Movies series. But there is a purpose to the fun that we are having. We're going to learn some deep truths about God and about life over these next few weeks. In fact, this is often how Jesus would teach. As you read through the Gospels, you see that Jesus loved to tell stories and parables. And these would be stories that people would recognize or be able to relate to in their day. And he would teach them things about God and about life through these parables. And so we're using some of our favorite movies as modern day parables to learn some deep things about ourselves and about life and about God. And we're going to learn something in these few weeks. So nudge your neighbor, tell them you're going to learn something. Come on, right? God is going to speak to you in these next few weeks. And today, we are obviously talking about Moneyball. How many have ever seen Moneyball? Raise your hand if you've ever seen it before, all right? Even if you haven't seen it, how many of you like baseball? Anybody like, man, I like baseball. America's favorite pastime. It's baseball season. I'm telling you that baseball is just getting ready to start. Spring training has already started, and opening day is just right around the corner. And do we have any Rangers fans in the house? Come on. Yeah. You guys are in it for the Rangers. I'm telling you, a couple years ago, it was pretty exciting, right? Won the World Series. Last year, not so much, right? Not so good, but we are praying and fasting and believing God. Come on. That this year is going to be another great year for the Rangers. I love baseball. I grew up loving baseball. In fact, I'll tell you, baseball was probably my first love when I was a kid. I played it, loved to watch it. My favorite baseball team was the Chicago Cubs. Any Cubs fans we have here, and I would grow up. I remember playing every day after school in the backyard with my friend Andy, who lived down the block. And every day we'd play. He loved the Braves, I loved the Cubs, and I would pretend like I was all the Cubs players. In fact, to this day, you can ask me in the lobby, I can tell you the whole lineup for the 1984 Chicago Cubs. I'm telling you, was my favorite team. He loved the Braves, and we would pretend to do that. And the story of Moneyball is a true story of a guy kind of like that, a guy named Billy Beane who loved baseball. He started out just as a young kid loving baseball, was pretty good at it, made it all the way up to the minor leagues, didn't make it to the major leagues, but at the end of his minor league career, he began to get involved in management, and he climbed his way all the way up the ladder to become the general manager of the Oakland A's. Now, here's the thing about the Oakland A's is that the Oakland A's were the smallest market, kind of lowest on the totem pole kind of a team. They had very little money. They had just lost a whole bunch of their best players. It looked like it was going to be a losing season for the A's. Everybody had written them off. Everyone was calling them losers. Everyone except Billy. And Billy believed that this team had potential. Billy believed in the team. He believed that the team had potential. And when I watch that scene, it reminds me of another story, a parable that Jesus told in the Gospels, the parable of the talents. How many ever heard the parable of the talents before? Basically, Jesus says there was a man who was like the owner we saw in the scene, and he had 3 servants, and he brought his 3 servants together to him, and to each one he gave a sum of money. To one he gave 5 bags of silver, to another he gave 2 bags of silver, and to another he gave 1 bag of silver, and he expected them to do something with what he had entrusted to them. And oftentimes when we hear that story, we think about the guy with 5 and the guy with 2. But oftentimes we don't relate as much to the guy with the 1. But I can imagine that maybe Billy would have related a little more to the guy with the 1. He's saying, man, I don't have what everybody else has. I can't compete with the Red Sox. I can't compete with the Yankees or the Dodgers. I only have 1 talent. What can I do with the 1 thing that I have been made responsible for? And the truth is, some of you maybe are in this room and maybe you can relate to that, and you look at your life and you say, I want to use my life for the kingdom. I want to do something with my life. I want to be successful, but it doesn't seem like I have that much to offer. I'm not a 5-talent guy or a 2-talent girl. I only have 1 talent, but here's what I want you to understand today. In fact, this is my first thought. If you're taking notes, you can write it down, and that is this, that God doesn't measure success the same way we do. God doesn't measure success the same way that we do. In fact, when we look at the culture, we see how people tend to want to measure success. You got to be somebody who has a great job, or someone who makes a whole lot of money, or live in a nice house, or drive a nice car, or be the popular one, or the famous one, or the person of great status. That's what so many people look for when they measure success in our world today. But here's what we got to understand is God's view of success is a little bit different than the culture's view. In fact, we can see what success looks like to God in this parable of the talents. Let's read it together. In Matthew chapter 25 and verse 14, it says, "And the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, and 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities." One guy got 5, one guy got 2, but here's the thing, one guy got 1. What does that mean? That means everybody has something that they can do with their life. That every single one of you sitting in this room today, you may think, well, I don't have very much to offer, but God has entrusted something to you. He has given you the life that you have. He has given you your family. He has given you your job, your children. He has given you talents and abilities and experiences, and He expects you to use those things for Him. And our job is not to measure ourselves against others, to compare and go, they have 5 and I only have 1. Our job is not to complain because we have less than the others. Our job is simply to take what God has given us and put it to work for His kingdom. How does God measure success? He measures success by what we do with what He has entrusted to us. Success is really measured by potential. We can see it in the story of the talents. We can see that each one had a different amount when they started, and each one had a different amount when they ended. And those who were commended were those who simply did their best, who reached their potential, who did all that they could with what the Master had entrusted to them. And that's exactly what we see in the story of Moneyball with Billy Beane. Here he is. He's in the lowest market, a team with the least amount of money, but he doesn't compare himself to the Red Sox. He doesn't compare himself to the Yankees. He says, what can we do with what we have? And in order to do something with what we have, he was determined he was going to have to do it a little different than everybody else was doing it. In fact, that's my second thought today. Not only does God not measure success the same as us, but number 2, to change your results, you might have to change your approach. Come on, how many know if you want to get some different results, you might have to do some things a little bit differently? And that's exactly what we see in Moneyball. Billy decided that he was going to take a different approach than everybody else in baseball was taking. Talk about a different approach. In a sport that was filled with romanticism and old school skepticism, to begin to do things differently, to use numbers to try to build a team. And can I just tell you that God's ways are also different than the ways of this world? That the culture is different, come on, than the way that God has called us to live. That God has called us to live by a higher standard. Come on, God has different ways for you to lead your family than the ways that people in this culture are leading their family. God has called you to live differently in the way you spend your money, or in the way you spend your time, or in the way you do relationships or dating or sexuality. God's ways are different than the ways that everybody else is doing them. And sometimes in order to get a different result, you have to be willing to take a different approach. You see, so many times what we want to do is we want to do what everybody else in the culture is doing, and then we wonder why we're getting the same results as everybody else is getting. But maybe God has called us to a different standard, to live in a different way. You see, so many times we try to fit into the culture, and even for a while, it seems like it's working out. We look around and we think that we are winning, but after a while, eventually it costs us. In fact, the Bible says it like this in Proverbs, that there is a way that seems right to man, but in the end, it leads to destruction. If we keep doing things our way and the culture's way, eventually it ends up costing us big time. And we see that in the culture around us. But here's the good news, is that God has a better way. Everybody say better way. God has a better way to live, and He has called us to a higher standard of living. In fact, the prophet Isaiah said it like this in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 8. He says, "For your thoughts are not my thoughts, and your ways not my ways, declares the Lord. For as high as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are different than your thoughts." God says, will you do things the way everybody else is doing them, or will you determined to do them my way? And that's the question today. Are you willing to take a different approach than everybody else? Are you willing to be different in order to get different results? Have you made the decision? Are you willing that you will do things God's way, that you will surrender to what His Word says and what His will is, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when others don't understand, even when it doesn't seem like it's going to work out, that you make the decision that I'm going to take a different approach and get some different results. And that's exactly what Billy did. Billy said, hey, we're going to go all in on this thing. We're going to do things a little different. And you would think that everyone would be excited about it, but can I tell you, not everybody loved it. In fact, that's my third thought today. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. Just because you believe in something doesn't mean that everybody else will. Come on, how many know just because you believe in something doesn't mean everybody else is going to be excited about it? And that's exactly what Billy and Peter found out as they began to take the different approach. All the traditionalists and the old school scouts of baseball felt threatened by it, and they began to push back. Anybody ever been there before? You tried a new approach and not everybody wanted to get on board? And can I tell you today, when you make the decision to really follow Jesus, to really do what He has called you to do, not everybody's going to like it. Come on, dads in the room, when you decide, hey, we're really going to lead our family in the things of God, you might get a little pushback from your teenage son or daughter at first. When you decide we're going to have the kind of marriage that God has called us to have, your spouse might not be right on board right off the bat. When you decide we're going to lead our business in the things of God and we're going to lead this business God's way, there might be some employees who don't really want to get on board. When you decide that some of your friends are a negative influence on you and you can't hang out with them in the way that you used to could hang out with them, come on, right? How many know some of them are not going to be really happy about it, and you're going to have that moment when you get to that place that nobody else is on board, but you have settled the issue. I'm going to do things God's way, because God's way is better than my way, even when it's hard, even when I don't like it, even when others don't like it, even when I have moments of doubt, even when it seems like God's way is not working. I have made up my mind. I'm going to do things God's way. And when you do that, guess what happens? If you don't give up, if you just keep being faithful, guess what happens then? God begins to bring the harvest in your life. In fact, I love the passage in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9 that says, do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you what? If you do not give and that leads me to my fourth thought today. If you're taking notes, you can write it down. God measures success differently than we do. To change the results, you might have to change your approach. Not everyone's going to believe it just because you do, but write this down. Number 4, maximize potential opens doors for more potential. I mean, know when you're faithful with what you've got, guess what? Then God can bless you with more. In fact, that's what we see in the parable of the talents. Look what it says in verse 21. To the man with 5 who turned it to 10. To the man with 2 who turned it to 4. The master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Come on, how many of you want God to bless you with more in your life, right? What's the secret to the blessing of more? The secret is being faithful with what you already have. Some of us go, man, I wish we could just buy a house. Man, I want a house so bad. Well, let me ask you, are you being faithful with the house that you're renting? Are you paying the rent on time? Are you taking care of the apartment? Are you being a good neighbor? Oh, I wish we could have a bigger house. Hey, are you inviting people over to the house that you have right now so you can have a small group and tell them about Jesus? Come on, are you raising your family in that house that you have now to serve and know and love the Lord? How's God going to bless you with more until you are faithful with what you already got? Come on, I wish I had a nicer car. Well, hey, are you taking care of the car that you got now? I wish I made more money. Are you being a tither with the money you got now? Are you being generous? Are you living on a budget? Are you being a good steward? Oh, man, I wish I could be the boss at work. I could do it so much better than that boss. Well, let me just tell you something. One day you might be the boss, and the kind of employees that you have when you are the boss are going to be the kind of employee that you were when you weren't the boss. Come on, right? And how can God bless you with promotion until you have been faithful with what you already have? But when you maximize the potential that you already have, then guess what God can do? God can then begin to bless you with more. And that's exactly what happened in the story of Moneyball. See, it's not just a biblical principle. Come on, it is a life principle. That Billy was faithful. He had the lowest market team in all the teams, the lowest amount of money, the worst players that everyone else would look and call them losers, but Billy did all that he could with what he had. And guess what happened? At the end of the season, they made it all the way to one game short of the World Series. Not just that, but in that 2001 season, they broke the record, the all-time record, still I believe stands to this day for the most wins consecutively, the American League record of 20 consecutive wins. And he did all of that with the little bit of nothing that he had. Why? Because he was faithful. He maximized his potential. And what happened? People began to notice. In fact, one day, Billy got a call. Who was the call from? The call was from the Boston Red Sox, one of the richest, most exclusive teams in the league. And the call was about this. They called to offer him a job as the general manager of the most prestigious team pretty much in the entire league. And they offered him the most money of any general manager of all time to that point of any sport. Some of you go, man, that's a great ending to the story. Come on, he was faithful and he got more and he went to work for the Red Sox, but that's not what happened at all. In fact, you know what happened? He turned the offer down. And he stayed with the A's. In fact, he was the general manager of the A's for 18 years. After that 18 years, he was promoted to being the senior executive vice president. And after that, was promoted to being the senior advisor. And all of that happened. Why? Because he chose to be faithful. In fact, that's my last thought. If you're taking notes today, you can write it down. And that is this: sometimes the best way to reach your full potential is just to be faithful. Everybody say faithful. Just be faithful. That's what happened in the story of the talents. The man who had 5 and turned it to 10. The man who had 2 and turned it to 4. What was the response of the master? Look what he said in verse 21. Well done, good and faithful servant. What is God's review of success? What is his view of what it means to be successful? Here's what it is just be faithful where you're at with what you have. Can you just be obedient to God to say, I will take what God has given me and I'll do everything that I can, my family, my job, my finances, my life, to be faithful with what God has blessed me with. That leads me to this one last scene. In fact, I wanted to show you this scene because it has some very personal and deep meaning to me. It's the whole reason that I wanted to do this movie and this series this year. You know, that scene has a lot of personal value to me. The reason is because a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, right after the pandemic, you know, being a pastor during the pandemic wasn't easy. People weren't coming to church, and I was trying to be faithful, but I wasn't feeling very successful. And I was in a discouraged moment. And one day, after a pretty discouraging day, I came home. I sat down on the couch, flipping through the channels, and Moneyball just happened to be on. And it's one of those movies where, you know, you have those movies where it doesn't matter if you start it from the beginning. It was halfway through, but it was on, and it just sucked me in. I began to watch. When I got to that moment, that scene, and he said, he hit a home run, and he didn't even realize it. Suddenly the Lord began to speak to me. Tears began to well up in my eyes. Got a little emotional like I'm kind of feeling right now. And the Lord began to say, you hit a home run, man, and you didn't even know it. You're so discouraged because you're comparing yourself to the guy who has 5 and the guy who has 2. But look around at what I've blessed you with. Have you forgotten? In all of your faithfulness, have you forgotten God's faithfulness? Look at your wife. Look at your kids. Look at all your friends and your family and the incredible church that I've blessed you with. Tears just began to stream down my face. And so when I was choosing what movies we wanted to do during At the Movies, I had to do this one because maybe some of you are here today, and maybe in all of your faithfulness, you're striving to be faithful, and that's good. I want you to be faithful. I want every one of you to be able to stand before God and hear Him say, well done, good and faithful servant. And so I want you to be faithful, but here's the thing, is sometimes as we strive towards faithfulness, it's easy to take for granted and forget the faithfulness of God in our own lives. And so here's my takeaway today when you leave. When you walk out to the parking lot, I want you, as you're walking up to your car, to step back for just a minute and look at that car. That car that you drive every day and you take for granted every day, it might be the very car that 2, 3, 5 years ago you prayed that God would give you. When you drive into your driveway at home, instead of just closing the garage door and going inside, I want you to sit back for just a little bit longer and look at that house. That house that you live in and you take for granted, it might be the very blessing that you at one time hoped that God would bring. When you sit down at lunch today, look deeply into the eyes of your spouse or your family or your loved ones and recognize, come on, some of the guys, we got to know, we hit a home run with our wives, right? More than we deserved. And yet so often we take it for granted. When you tuck your kids in at night tonight, squeeze them a little tighter. They are blessings from God. And so oftentimes in all of our trying to be faithful, we can compare and go, well, I don't have the 5 or I don't have the 2, but everything that we have came from God. Come on, we hit a home run. He hit a home run for us. And so many times we take it for granted.
Thank you for joining us online today. Make sure and hit subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for more notifications. We can't wait to engage with you this week.